Hello, and welcome to Possibilities, the show where we give people living with a variety of different abilities and their loved ones a space to share their lives with the world. Thank you for joining us today, and here's your host, Danny Steeves.
Thank you, Randy, and welcome to another episode of Possibilities. Before I start the show today, I would like to acknowledge my team behind the scenes. I would like to acknowledge the highest work that we do behind the scenes, in creating the show. I I couldn't do it without my team. So thank you very much, Mark and Pat and Angela. Um, you guys are a huge help to me, even though you didn't really have all that much to do with this episode, but you guys are always willing to lend a hand when I need you, so thank you very much. Anyway, on with today's show. Today is gonna be a follow-up to episode 22, I believe, where I talked to where I did a panel with a bunch of people with where I did a panel with Amanda, St. Dennis, Paula Selfwood, and Dr. Darcy Catelyn. Now, if you want to go back, I highly recommend you do that because we're gonna this conversation coming up today is gonna be a follow-up to that, and we're gonna be talking about transitioning from adult care to pediatric care, from pediatric care to adult services, and how what the barriers are and what we can do about them and what the solutions are to that particular problem. Now I'm gonna be joined by Kim Murray. She's a she's a former member of the Temps Valley Children Centre transition team, and she was instrumental in my transition, and we're also gonna be joined by Dr. Catelyn Cassidy, a physiatrist with Parkwood Hospital in London, and both of these ladies were instrumental in in my transition, and I'm gonna talk about how you how they believe is the best plan of action for your loved one who is about ready to transition into adult services from pediatric. So, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever and join me and my guest for this important conversation coming up here, and we will hopefully give you valuable insight along the way. So stay tuned, and we will be right back with Tim and Dr. Cassidy. Be right back, everyone. And, and welcome back to Possibilities. Joining me now is Tim Murray, a former a former um, a former member of the transition team at Temps Valley Children Centre, and also joining me is Dr. Catelyn Cassidy, a physiatrist at Parkwood Hospital in London. Welcome to Possibilities, ladies.
So happy to be here, Danny. Thanks for inviting me.
Very honored.
Thank you for joining me. So, Kim, I thought we might start with you. What in your experience, what are the biggest barriers for someone who is just starting their transition journey?
The biggest barriers. I think it varies for sure from person to person, but I think one of the things that's tricky is that oftentimes people want to start with what can't happen or what the barriers are, right? Like, and so having that opportunity to just explore what you like and what you hope for and what might be possible, I think is one of the trickiest things about starting, because people aren't always ready to go there. They're not always ready to think about those things. We're often presented more with, well, you can't do this, or there's no funding for that, right? And so being able to find ways to think beyond that in order to get towards what really is the hope for the future.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned the the barriers of people saying, "Oh, you can't do this or you can't do that because of X, Y, Z." How do we break that cycle of making people think we can't do something, Kim?
I think it's a lot of discussion, right? Like I think it's just sharing experiences. So starting to connect with people who have done those things, right? Like starting to see other role models out there who are doing um, cool and different things. Helps to people start to think outside the box about what might be possible,
Yeah,
and then acknowledging, I guess, the fear involved with thinking about what might be, why that might be a challenge. You know, some things might be a challenge, but a challenge doesn't necessarily mean they're impossible. Um, and so I think it's helpful to normalize that, right? Like when I think about my kids, whether they have disabilities or not, sometimes they want to go on a path that is not a guaranteed outcome, right? They want to be a they want to be a performer, they want to be an actor or an actress or a dancer or something that might be, you know, those jobs are tricky. um, but there's some real value in exploring that pathway anyways, because some people are
yeah,
dancers and actors and performers and those tricky things. And so we shouldn't close the doors without exploring first.
yeah.
Right? And so normalizing that exploring.
Absolutely. Dr. Cassidy will get back, will bring you in on this conversation. We'll get into the medical system in a bit here, but first of all, do you agree with everything that Kim has said so far? What?
I totally agree. I don't think that there's any one answer to any of the questions that you've asked so far, Danny, right? So
No,
I
no,
think that the points that Kim has brought up are totally valid and
yeah,
very important, right? And everything that we think about when we focus on the transition from pediatric to adult care, you know, we're trying to think about things from different perspectives. We're trying to think about things outside the box. We're trying to think about what's possible as opposed to just, you know, the challenges and the barriers. I think all of those things are totally true and totally valid.
yeah, yeah, I, Kim, I'll ask you this, if someone is thinking of, um, if someone is beginning their journey to transitioning, where would be the best spot to begin? Like, what would your advice be for that situation?
So you're asking like what would be the best spot to begin in terms of the exploring that transition or getting ready for that transition?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think like with the program that I worked with, we always just started with getting to know yourself, right? And what's important to you as a person. What are your hopes and dreams? What are the things that you value? What do you like to do? What would you like your future to look like? So that's the first part, because that's going to be what gives you the energy to get through the next parts, right? If you have this good vision of what you want, where you want to go.
Yeah.
And then it's a lot of information gathering and making connections. So
And,
figuring out where are the supports, right? Like what are the things that can be helpful?
and what kind of information gathering would you suggest for that?
hmm
Mm,
So I think again, it depends on the family, the client and the family, the youth and the family, and what they already know and what they're because some people are good researchers and already know a lot, but just knowing what's available in your community,
yeah,
right? Like what are the supports available at school? What are the adult supports that are out there? who are the people you might want to connect with? Is there somebody, another youth who has been through kind of the same transition that might be a nice mentor or support? What are the requirements? What are for whatever activities you might want to do, or career path you're looking for, or those pieces? And so oftentimes it's the school has a piece. There might be some community organizations that have a piece. There's definitely a medical piece in that. And kind of a financial piece, I guess, too, about where the funding comes from for that.
This is an open-ended question, but anyone can jump in on this. But why do you think starting the transition journey is so hard? And are there ways that we can make it easier? Open up the floor for anyone.
I don't know, Kim, if you want to jump in, or I'm happy to jump in there too. Again, Danny, I think there's a lot of answers to your question, right? I think probably, a couple of the big things about why it's difficult from my perspective I've observed is that, there's a lot of security and comfort and a sense of sort of safety in the pediatric system where you've been your whole life and you're comfortable there, and you know who to ask which questions, and all of the stuff. You've figured it out. You've become an expert in it over 18 or 21 years, either you or your family or other people who are participating in your care. And the adult side is just like a big, huge unknown. And you've probably heard scary stories from those who've gone before you about how it's been difficult. And that doesn't make anyone feel good or excited heading into it, right? Leaving behind your comfortable, safe zone and heading off into the great unknown, right? And partly that's because, there are challenges and limitations on the adult side, perhaps to a greater degree than what we've experienced on the pediatric side. But partly that's just because it's unknown, right? And so that can be a big barrier, I think. And, related to that, I think one of the biggest things that we can do to help with that is start talking about it early and make it less scary. And, try to have some of those opportunities to hear from a mentor or, meet with your new provider before you leave your old one, or do some of those things that are required. And I'm obviously talking from a medical standpoint, but that's not obviously the only or even the most important part of transition. But it's the part that I'm probably more familiar with. But, just going through all of that and demystifying and figuring out where those points of success and light can be, I think is probably a big part of making it less intimidating.
Do you want to jump in there on that, Kim?
I think I agree for sure with you, Dr. Cassidy, about just the unknown being scary. And I think that there's I think a lot of people who have grown up with especially kind of some medical challenges, it's very natural for us. Service providers want to protect, parents want to protect, teachers want to protect, right? Like we like to wrap around and support.
Absolutely.
And in the support, I think sometimes we forget that some of how we learn is by making mistakes and experiencing failures and taking some risks that may or may not turn out. And so that becomes a new thing in adulthood too, that maybe, I wonder, is there a way, when you talk about can we make it easier, I wonder, how do we support families and care providers and schools to allow a little bit more of that risk taking throughout your lifespan so that it's not new just in your teen years or in your adult years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest barriers that I see, and we talked about this on my last episode um, of when I brought up this topic to my other panelists. In part one, it's very often the medical records are so scattered that it's hard to t- like one doctor does this, one doctor does that, one doctor does X, Y, Z. So Dr. Cassidy, how can we stop that from happening?
Oh, just that's an easy one. That is not an easy one. That is a hard one. I don't think that there is sort of an obvious answer to that. And I think there's a lot of sort of systemic reasons why that's true. Just the way that sort of medical records are kept and things sometimes makes it very difficult for us to find all that information in one place. I hope that as time goes on and, governments are supportive as they have been of sort of including more electronic charting and things like that, that might allow us at least to find more information, at least all in one same place, which is not currently the case. That would still, though, require like a new adult provider would have to go through, 20 years of documentation if they wanted to get sort of all the detail right from the beginning until, the time of transition, which is overwhelming in many cases. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that we've tried to do in some of our transition clinics here is that we have an adult provider, usually myself, who goes over and starts seeing adolescents before they make that jump over onto the adult side. So I go and see them in the pediatric clinic. And one of the roles of the nurse in that clinic is to comb through some of at least the recent medical chart information and kind of get a summary of where we're at with sort of common issues or more pressing issues that have come up for that patient in the last couple of years. And so I think that's really helpful, sort of a document that can serve as the basis of our understanding medical sort of profile of that patient as we start the process of thinking forward to transition. So those overlap clinics, I think, is one strategy that can be helpful to try to address that at least partially. But I think there's still work to do there for sure.
All of this sounds rather daunting. When you're hearing all of this for the first time. So, open-ended question again. What is the best way to put a person's mind at ease?
The best way to put a person's mind at ease, you mean someone who's like going through the transition from pediatric to adult care?
Yeah.
So speaking from the medical standpoint, which is again my area of expertise, what I think has been the most helpful for people is, and I'm speaking from the sort of privileged position of working in a program that transitions people over to adult care. So I recognize that I'm talking about this unique situation, which is different than people who don't live in an area where there's sort of an integrated adult program. But in our situation, what I have found to be the most helpful is that patients have a person. They know who they're supposed to call if there's a problem that comes up once they've left that sort of cocoon safe environment of the pediatric sphere. So not necessarily that the adult provider or, whether the adult provider is a social worker or a physician or a physiotherapist or whoever, not that they're necessarily going to know the answer right away, but that there's someone that the person knows that they can call and that person is going to know where to direct them or will work to find out the answer to that. Yeah. So in our program, we have a nurse practitioner who is there. That's the phone number that they get so that they know that's who they can contact.
Kim, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it really is that sense that there are supports and you know who they are. So that I think as a clinician, um, it's helpful for, I'm hoping it's helpful. And from what I've read in the research, people say it's helpful to just know that there's somebody that you can call that will always answer your questions. So, um, you know, Danny, if you or your family had questions either while we were working together or even after,
Yeah,
I'd want you to know, call me, and if I don't know the answer, we'll figure it out together.
yeah,
Um, and so I think that finding that person is an important part, and then also helping to break it down into steps, right? Like the advantage of starting early is that you don't have to deal with it all at once. You can
right,
start gradually and do little
yeah,
bits at a time. And so I'm hoping that those things make it a little less daunting.
like, like, um, breaking it down into steps, like, what, what order of things would you, I know um, you're, you're not in the program anymore, Tim. Um, um, when you were, what order would you approach that? Like,
Hmm.
was there a certain order?
So, yeah.
Yeah,
I think for me, what I would a lot of times I would take my direction from the families that I was working with or the youth that I was working with
yeah,
about
yeah,
what's most important to you. Because, like I might think it's important to start looking at housing options or something early, but if you're not feeling ready or interested, then that's not going to make it less daunting. It's going to make it more daunting than I'm.
yeah,
Uh, so I think a lot of it is what is what is the question that you have right now? That would be where we start. But also just even practicing those soft skills, like encouraging the youth to start asking questions in their doctor's appointment or coming to their school team meetings and participating actively, sharing the information with their teachers about what they need in terms of accommodations. All of those skills are skills that are super helpful um, on the other side of the transition. And so the more you can practice them early, the more comfortable they feel when you really need them.
that is a great point, and I'll ask you this again, Kim. What happens if that individual is afraid to ask those questions? Like, how would you how would
Mhm.
you approach that situation?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little bit the same as I probably would with any other youth that is kind of learning some new skills. So, right,
Yeah,
I'd be like, well, what will help you with that?
yeah,
Do you want to practice it together before you go into, like, have some questions written
yeah,
out that you're going to read out when you go into the meeting? Do you want to bring me into the meeting or your mom or your dad or a friend? Like, what would help you feel more comfortable? And
yeah.
start really small, right? It can be one little question at first. It doesn't have to be you have to run the meeting right at the beginning, but um, sit there and listen and maybe ask one question.
What, do you agree with that, Dr. Cassidy?
I totally do. And I actually had heard your question maybe a little bit differently at first. And I thought you were asking maybe about what to do if maybe the person who's working through the transition is afraid to ask for what they need, right? Is afraid to ask
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
my big question's about housing. Maybe they're really afraid to say that. Or my big question is about healthy
yeah.
sexuality as an adult. Like that's sometimes a really difficult question for people to ask. And
How would,
so
how
I
would, yeah,
sorry, Danny.
go
I think that what I try to do for those types of things, I just make it totally normal. And I have the luxury of when I see patients, I'm going to see them again. I'm not just going to see them that one time and then call it a day. So we get the opportunity of saying, here's some questions that I have, and I ask all these questions, and maybe they don't feel comfortable answering them for me on the first time. But I can say things like, these are things that it's okay for you to ask me about. And these are things that maybe you've never asked anyone before, or things that you've never felt comfortable asking anyone before. But this is stuff that I talk to people about regularly. And so even if you don't feel comfortable asking me those questions today, you could think about it between now and when I see you next. And if you feel comfortable, you could ask me next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Cassidy, is your line of medicine pretty new then? Like,
Is it, sorry, say that again, Danny, is it pretty what? Pretty new?
yeah, like it's physiatrist pretty new?
That's a good question. I don't actually know when physiatry started. I wouldn't say it's new. It's definitely like many decades worth of physiatrists, but it is still a pretty small specialty compared to others. So you won't find as many physiatrists around as you will, general internal medicine or family doctors or things like that. But definitely we've been around for a while, and the field focuses on the care of people who have functional limitations for sort of a variety of reasons. So, my practice has focused on people who have conditions like CP and spina bifida and developmental disability as they transition and continue their sort of lifelong journey with their condition. But then other physiatrists might do things like, the care of people who've had a stroke or an amputation or spinal cord injury or anything that might sort of impair their function.
So, physiatrist isn't a one size fits all solution. I mean, like there's different people who specialize in certain areas. Then
So just like other just like other areas of medicine, you'll find a variety of different ways that people practice physiatry. So here where I work in London is what we call an academic center, because we're associated with Western University. And so in these sort of larger cities, with especially in academic centers, you'll find that people tend to be more subspecialized. So we have people who look at each population sort of individually. And that's the same, like, in internal medicine, you'll find people who do general internal medicine versus people who just focus on cardiology or just focus on respirology or whatever the case may be. And then often in sort of smaller centers or sort of community care settings rather than academic care settings, you'll more often find people who do what's called general physiatry. So they would kind of take care of the span of all of those different populations that I previously described.
Kim, what are the or Dr. Cassidy open-ended? I guess I was gonna focus on one area for this question, but I'll open up the floor. If someone doesn't have a physiatrist, it does their transition get harder or easier, do you think?
I hope I don't make people's transition harder, although I don't know. So I don't know if it's harder without a physiatrist, or I don't know if it's harder with a physiatrist. I hope a physiatrist only contributes to making it easier, at least in some ways. But I still think that transition can happen successfully without a physiatrist too. It just, from a medical standpoint, the transition really just requires that you have someone on the adult side who's going to be your medical person, someone who'll go to bat for you and someone who'll say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to try to figure it out. And so that
Yeah.
to me is sort of the medical piece. And I think still a challenge for many people, because I think that can be I think that very successfully can be a family doctor, a primary care provider. But often a lot of our patients either don't have a general practitioner in their care circle, have trouble getting one, or sometimes might be attached to a care provider who doesn't have an accessible office, for example, or something like that. But I think those transitions can still be very successful. And Kim, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, or if you've kind of worked through the transition in different settings with different people, and if you have different ideas about that.
Kim, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we're very lucky, Dr. Cassidy, to have you in your clinic, because I remember I've been a clinician long enough that I pre-exist that. So yeah, I think because when I think it is trickier when there's not somebody who has that great breadth of knowledge or kind of holistic approach to the transition. And so, as you were saying, Dr. Cassidy, finding who that person is on the adult side, if it's not a physiatrist, who is it? Is it the family doctor? And then maybe what does the family doctor need? Because Danny, your generation is really the first generation, I think, that is exploring how to live life in the community in so many different ways,
Yeah.
right? As independent and self-directed people, and that is new for a lot of people on the medical side, right? They may not have the same experience of how to work with individuals who might have some differences.
And that is a great segue to my next question, because again, on my last episode, and if my audience hasn't seen that one yet, I highly recommend you go and watch it, because you probably would get more out of this episode by watching that one first. But my question is to you, Dr. Cassidy. When I approached this on my last episode, Dr. Darcy Billings said that there's a lot of complexity when it comes to people with CP or what have you, or the whatever the diagnosis is. So my question to you is, how do we break that complexity and make it easier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, education is a really big and important part of that. And that sort of demystifying the medical and non-medical needs of the young adult with cerebral palsy, I think has to rely a little bit on educating providers who will be involved in the care of those people, and B, providing backup to them, right? So, because I don't think it's reasonable or fair for us to expect, specialists in family medicine or general practice type medicine to have all of the details of the intricacies of management of these conditions, because they're not specialists in this particular area. That's exactly why they're so great, is because they're not specialists in these areas. And so they know so much about so many things. They can't be expected to know every last small detail about these complex conditions. And so I think what's important is education about the common things that we encounter in these sort of complex conditions, because common things are common. And, family doctors, I think, are well positioned to do things like manage, reflux that we see often in this population, or constipation that we see often in this population. So I think, those are things that we can provide some education around and hopefully kind of increase the confidence that general practitioners may have with dealing with some of those issues, knowing that we don't expect them to know all of the details about the more complex situations. And, we're around. And I think that's where we still need to do some building, is that there's maybe not a ton of people around for the family doctors to access if things are kind of going above and beyond that level into the more complex issues.
How do we build that trust, Dr. Cassidy, if the medical professionals, as you call them, are not sure how to handle that situation? How do we let them know that you are out there to assist them? Yeah.
How do you, as a patient, let them know that people like me are out here? Is that what you mean?
Or anyone for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny that that's a hard question to answer, because it seems like it should be easy, but even myself, when I started practice, I found it was not super easy to know who was around or who did what. And I sympathize with my family practice colleagues who are trying so hard to keep track of all the specialists in every field and who does what in each of those fields and make the right referral to the right person. And, I have the utmost respect for the work that they do to try to make those connections, because they are out there trying to make those connections, right? Like, they are trying to find the right person for their patient. I think, for example, when someone starts a practice, they do things like send a letter out to the family doctors who are in their area to say, hey, I'm starting this practice and here's the types of things that I do. So, that kind of stuff does happen, so that the general practitioners in the community know sort of who's around and what they're up to. But there probably does need to be some better way for that to be sort of widely known. And I think there's a lot of people who share that opinion. So I sit on a number of committees and have conversations about this type of thing all the time. And it's very common that the question comes up, sort of, how do we connect people to the providers that they need, especially when, as we've said a couple of times, there's not that many adult specialty care providers for people who have CP or spina bifida or whatever. There's not that many of them around. And so how do we make a directory of them? How do we make it easy for, people living with the conditions to find those specialists, or family doctors to find those specialists, or whoever else? I don't think it's a super easy question to answer, unfortunately.
This is going that way, but you mentioned when you first started practicing, or what have you, I don't know what you call it, when you first started in your line of work, there wasn't psychiatrist out there. So do you believe that if there was, that it would make your job a lot easier? Or yeah.
I do think that it's been helpful, right? That Dr. Cassidy and the clinic that was started has been, because before that there wasn't really, you were searching individually for kind of a medical support that would work on the adult side with the young person who's transitioning, right? And so I do think it's made it a lot easier, and I recognize that it's not accessible to everybody because of where they live or other pieces of, and so it would be great if that continues to grow as a specialty area. But as Dr. Cassidy said, like even without that, sometimes you just knock on doors until you find the right person who is kind of willing to learn and able to connect and be a good support.
Looking on your side, go ahead, Dr. Cassidy.
Thanks, Danny. I was proud of myself for remembering to use the raise hand function. I just wanted to add to that point that you just made and to the comments that we were sharing before about sort of how do we build this capacity. And I as I said, I've heard this more than once in lots of different settings, and lots of people are trying to think about this and figure it out. And I do think that one opportunity that we have sort of in this, day and age, and especially with all the advances that have been made over the last couple of years, is that there may be more opportunities for things like telemedicine or, virtual care to play a role in providing at least some level of care to patients who may not be geographically close to a specialty clinic that runs, in certain areas, right? So I do think that is something that is an area of potential growth that could try to address some of this. It's still, you can't have one practitioner who provides telemedicine to, this many patients because they don't have that much time.
Yeah.
But I think it's an opportunity for sure.
Yeah. 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 And I'll get back to it in a minute, but I have gone through the transitioning process myself, and I'll let my audience in on a little secret. The person was perfect to really help me on sitting right here. Kim, I wanted to ask you this. In what year did you and I start working together?
That's a good question. What year did you graduate, Danny?
I graduated in let's see. I had to do the math here.
I know.
20. I was in high school for 7 years, but that's because it took me longer to complete everything. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you and I started about the middle of high school together.
Yeah. And what you really I wasn't really sure going in so you really put my mind at ease going into this. What I would like to know is putting people's mind at ease different for everyone, or is it pretty similar when you start the process?
That's, first of all, thank you. I think one of the things that I would love to that I really appreciate knowing that you felt more at ease.
Yeah,
Because that's a hope of mine in making that connection, is that,
yeah,
that can be an outcome. Um, I don't know. It is different for sure with different people, because I think we all
yeah,
have different worries coming into looking at that transition together. But I think there's some common things. And Dr. Cassidy, I heard you allude to some of them too, right? Like just letting people know that it's normal to have for this to feel uncomfortable at times, and to have some different questions. And so I find it always really helpful to just put that on the table, let people know, I'm going to ask you some weird questions. You can answer them when you feel ready to answer them, or not at all, right? Like it's okay if you don't want to answer my weird questions, and you can ask me weird questions. um,
yeah.
and yeah, I think that helps, right? Just to really be transparent about that.
Um, sorry, Kim, sorry to interrupt, but
No.
the, uh, what, I'm asking this on behalf of my audience, like, what are some of the questions that you would ask a person, that might, ha- that might catch them off guard?
hmm Sometimes, so oftentimes there are questions about what your hopes and dreams are,
Yeah,
for the future, that some people, you ask them that question and they're like, I've thought about this and I'm happy to share it right away. But
yeah,
there's some other people who are like, I'm a little hesitant to tell you, because I don't know how you're going to react, or if you're going to laugh at me or tell me that it's not okay to want to be that, to want to do that.
um, like, do you have an example, Kim?
An example of of when it might have been tricky.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So I think about, I have a couple of people that I worked with that I remember them being a little, we needed to build trust before they could share what they wanted,
um,
what their hope for their future was. Um,
do you remember one of mine?
One of yours, you wanted to be a radio announcer
Yeah,
when we were working together, which I think is super cool, because it's a good example, Danny, right? Like in terms of,
mm,
you were really interested in radio broadcasting and made some connections with the radio station in town, um,
yeah,
and out of that, like what most of us do with our careers, right? You kind of explore what links with that. And here you are as like the podcast host, which is very much in line with the same kind of work, right?
yeah.
So,
The reason why sorry for my audience, uh, to get off topic here, but we'll get back to it in a minute. But one of the reasons why I started this um show is because I I dabbled in the motivational speaking realm for a little bit, but then I realized I wasn't getting very many gifts as they say. So I was like, what what is an area of of expertise that I have that can still benefit people, but I don't have to wait for a gig to come along and do it. So that's why this show came along, and I've been doing it ever since. So I guess you have a hand in this Tim.
I think that I'm pretty honored about that. I think this is it's super exciting for me to be here, having remembering back and hearing those initial dreams about what some of the things that you wanted to do, and that I think it's a great example, right, of that exploring piece that is really part of the transition, right? Is coming up with some initial ideas and then trying some things out, and then you try them out and you decide you want to tweak them this way or that way and come up with your own path.
Yeah, because I wasn't really sure. I tried broadcasting on the radio for a bit, but then I decided no, not for me. Even though I still get the bug to do it every once in a while, I realize it's not possible, so I am doing this instead. And even though I don't have very many viewers yet, I am building this talk show from the ground up, and I believe this episode that we're filming now is episode 32 or 33 of this show. So I've been at it for years and years, but I'm happy with where I am today. So thank you for giving me in the right direction, Tim. I guess.
I feel like you would have found your path with or without me, but I think it's super cool, right? Like the impact that you have with this podcast goes beyond what, even the number of viewers.
Yeah. I want to bring Dr. Cassidy on this conversation, because while I feel like I'm feeling a lot of tea today, as they say in this podcast realm, but Dr. Cassidy is actually my physiatrist, and I feel extremely lucky to have her in my corner, as they say. And yeah, I want to explore our journey a little bit together. So, Dr. Cassidy, when did I become your patient?
Well, first of all, thank you for that, Danny. I feel lucky to be on your team too. And I didn't know there was going to be all these skill testing questions. I don't know when you first became my patient, other than I know that we met while you were still a patient at Temps Valley. So that would have been before you kind of formally made the jump to the adult side. I am terrible with dates. So that's the best I can do for you. You were still in high school also when we met. But yeah, that's when it all began. So back when you were still in your safe pediatric cocoon, I burst into it and then pulled you over to the adult side with me.
And I am so grateful for jumping in on this journey with you because you made it a heck of a lot easier. I both of you did actually I don't mean to flatter you, Dr. Cassidy, but a little bit of a funny story
Okay.
I'll share with you. When my first appointment with you, I was like, I have a picture in my mind of what the Dr. Cassidy might look like, of course, as you always do, and then you walked in, and I was like, holy crap! Like, I even my dad was like amazed about how young you were when you first met, and now we're going on, I would say, about 10 years together or so.
We're probably closing in on that. I don't think it's probably been 10 just yet, but I'm sure we're close.
Yeah,
That's super kind of you to say, Danny.
yeah. So, but, again, Dr. Cassidy, what would you say to someone who is looking for some help but doesn't know where to turn? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, how do people find a psychiatrist such as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So there are the sort of standard tools of ways you can find doctors in your area. So you can do things like searching on the CPSO, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario is a listing of all the doctors who are in the area, and you can search by specialty. And that's one way you can do it. You can also ask your family doctor, if you have a family doctor, if they know of anyone who's around. And often, even if they don't know if a physiatrist in their area is taking patients with CP or with other similar conditions, at least they might know who's available, and they can at least ask the question and start a conversation around who else might be available. So I think those are probably kind of two good ways to at least see who's around your geographic area.
And I should have asked you this before, but I forgot. But what speaking of the medical field, why do you believe that a regular family doctor, as the case may be, are so afraid to afraid to treat people with disabilities as you? Yeah. Why do you think people, regular physicians are afraid to meet people with disabilities?
I think that's a good question. And, I don't know that I would put a blanket statement that other doctors are afraid to treat people with disabilities. I think it's going to be very physician dependent. So I think you might find a family doctor who feels very comfortable treating people with disabilities, and then you'll find others who are not. And I think that that's going to come down to a number of factors. So, we've talked about some of them already. So like education, for example. So if during someone's training, like a family physician's training or another kind of provider's training, if they've had exposure to people who've had cerebral palsy or other people who've had other conditions, then I think that goes a long way to making them feel more comfortable diving in and participating in care. Just, I'm not going to feel comfortable treating someone who has, name your random condition if it's something that I was never educated in, if it's something that I've never been trained in terms of how to provide treatment, because I don't want to overstep my bounds in terms of what my expertise is. And I don't want to, do anything that might hurt a patient, for sure. Right. So I think that there's a lot of education that goes into that, experience with, having had other patients or either in training or then later in their practice. And I think, again, that back piece, right? So I think people are more willing to dive in if they know that if they get in over their head, they have someone they can ask. And I think that's like, I find that for myself, where I dive into treating different things for my patients who have cerebral palsy or whatever condition that maybe, not traditionally in something that someone might think of as something a physiatrist might treat, but I've done that because it's something that I've seen in my training or something that I developed experience with during my own personal practice. But I do know that if I'm, I get to a point and I say, that's it, I can't go further than that, but I know who I can call, who can help, right? So I think that's a big part.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, this, Dr. Cassidy, when you were training, when you were in medical school, how did you know that you wanted to be a physiatrist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually didn't know physiatry existed when I went into medical school, which is actually pretty common for people who go into medical school. It's not a super well-known field, so I think a lot of people don't know about it. So we had some physiatrists who did some teaching sessions when I was a medical student. And so I, piqued my interest there in terms of the stuff they were teaching us about. And I have the personal experience of growing up with a family member with CP. And so I had already known and decided that my life's work would be involved in caring for people who had CP and other sort of childhood onset conditions. I just didn't know exactly how. So once I discovered that physiatry was an option, that's the way I went.
So it was because of your family member that you got into the field that you're in.
Yeah, I think you could say that for sure.
Tim, I want to ask you this. And then we're running a bit short on time here, so just a few more questions and then we'll wrap up. But Tim, where do people if they're getting to the age where they are like, oh, I think it's time for me to begin this journey and I don't know where to go, where would you direct them?
So a lot of the youth that we're talking about would maybe be connected to the Children's Treatment Centre, right? So like TVCC or Holland Bloorview or Kids Ability, all of those children's treatment centers that are around the center. I think those are good starting points because almost every one of the children's treatment centers will have some kind of transition support or program. It looks different and is called different things at every center. So just to call and ask about that support for young people who are looking ahead, and for their families, because I think it's a It's a transition not just for the young people, but for the families. And if you're not connected to the Children's Treatment Center, I mean, you can still phone and then maybe get connected. But other good places might be to be asking at school. The schools might know some supports, or community living, any of those kind of community supports that you might be connected with are probably a good place to start
Yeah,
and see what supports are out there.
yeah, yeah, and I the and open-ended question again. On my last episode, we talked about some tools that would be handy, like I know at Holland Dr. Young Willem Border, who you know very well, Dr. Cassidy, I'm sure he developed some apps that can help with transition. So on that topic are tools that can help people when they're ready to transition. So I'll go around the table and you both can answer this. What are the, I guess, the top 5 or however many you want to list? What are some tools that you would recommend for people who are looking for transition assistance? Kim, I'll begin with you.
So Danny, this is the tricky question for me because I'm not with the Youth Discovery Program anymore. And I know that the resources change so quickly, but I do know there's some incredible websites out there that will have lots of videos, and information and checklists. So I think if you just start even with a Google search for kind of transition supports for people with disabilities or any specific disability that you might be talking about, you get a whole list, and I would start exploring those. I know that connectability is often it used to have like a whole, it had many links to other websites that were also super useful. And the children's treatment centers would have usually a resource link on their webpage that would point you in the right direction of some really valuable websites, books, webinars, that kind of thing. CanChild, the CanChild website's a really good one.
I'm quite familiar with CanChild myself because thanks to Dr. Cassidy, I'm involved with teaching it, and we do a ton of work with CanChild and OBI and all of those other organizations. So I would highly suggest you check out the CanChild website or keeping that or whatever. Dr. Cassidy, same question to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And There are, apps in development. I don't actually think that they're readily available to the general public as yet, because they're still sort of in research phases as far as I know. But the two things that come to mind immediately for me is, so the first is from the Holland Bloorview website, the My Health Passport. So that's a website that you can use and of course, again, I focus on the medical transition as opposed to maybe all the other pieces of it, although I do talk about all those things in clinic, Kim, I promise. But just when I'm thinking about resources, it's more medical stuff that comes to mind. So the My Health Passport allows you to fill in a bunch of information about your own health care so that you can then have it as like a little printout that you can have in your wallet, and you can take it to appointments, and you can have it with you in case you ever have to go to the emergency room or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's one.
Sorry, Dr. Cassidy.
Yeah.
Was that app developed by Dr. Young Williams' daughter, or do you know?
Which one? The My Health Passport?
Yeah.
So it's not an app. It's and it predates anything that I'm aware of that Dr. Horter has been working on as far as an app goes. It's been available on Holland Bloorview for years. I think it was spearheaded by Dr. Kaufman, actually, who was an adolescent medicine provider at Bloorview, but I could be wrong now that I've just said that on a live recording. But yeah, it's just a website at Bloorview, and it's like a drop-down menu where you can fill in stuff about the name of your condition, your doctors, your medications, surgeries that you've had, so that you can have it all sort of listed in an easy to read format in one place. So I think that's one thing that is a really sort of universally available, easy to use tool to track at least your medical information, which is important. Right at the very beginning of this conversation, you talked about how your medical record can become so fractured. And so if you have these sort of like critical pieces of information of your own that you have sort of that control over, I think that can be really helpful. And then the other one that I would say is also, it's been around for quite a while, is it's called On Track, TRAC. And it's a set of resources that's available through the BC Children's Hospital website. And there's essentially what they've developed is a toolkit of different things that you can go through, where you kind of, work through a worksheet that's like, do I know the names of my medications and what they're for? Do I know the phone number for my pharmacy so that I can call and renew them? Do I have, all this kind of different information? And I have focused mostly the medical components of that, but there are non-medical components of that as well, so that it's sort of looking at all elements of transition, so that, if you're so inclined as you're preparing for transition, you can kind of work through that and see, oh, this is something I've never thought of, something that I should, maybe spend some time thinking about before I leave the pediatric system. So I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And one yeah, a great advice, both of you. One story that I'll share, and then it will lead into one of my final questions. When I was in 2011, I was diagnosed with a rare condition called diffuse nerve artery syndrome, and I had a G tube in for many years, and then when it came time for its removal, I wasn't in pediatric anymore, and then when it went in, I was in pediatric. I forgot to mention that, but I will mention that now. When the G-tube when I was in pediatrics, and then when it went out, I was an adult. So my my family doctor was afraid to cut was afraid to touch it and I was shocked, and so my mom called the people who put it in, and they said, "Oh, we can't see you anymore because you're an adult now." So guess what? Guess who took it out was my mom, and that shouldn't have been her responsibility. So, Dr. Cassidy, you answered this before on the show, but I'll ask you once again. Why do you think people regular trained professionals are regular medical professionals are afraid to touch anything that is out of their scope, and how can we bridge the gap so it doesn't happen anymore?
That's a great question. And I actually don't think it's specific to people who have a childhood onset disability. So I also work in inpatient rehabilitation, in an inpatient rehabilitation setting. And I think anytime there's a transition of care, there's a risk that there's something that doesn't get well communicated. So, like I could have a patient who is here on the inpatient unit who has a tube in that they don't need anymore, but there's no documentation from the person who put it in saying when it can safely come out. And there's no new person who's now taking care of that tube. And then no one else who never was involved in putting the tube in ever really feels comfortable saying, well, I'm going to make the decision that this tube's going to come out when someone else made the decision that it had to go in. So I think that it's that comes down, I think, to good communication with forethought, which I think these are all just humans, right? All doctors are just humans, and they're all doing their best and they're getting through their day. And I think sometimes it's hard to remember that documentation should include a plan for what to do when it's no longer needed. This is who you should call. This is how you take it out. This is when it's ready to come out, all of those different things, so that a different care provider knows what that plan was. So I don't think that's really specific. I think that comes down to good communication and transition of any setting.
And this might be a weird question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Do you think that the doctor who put it in should be the one who takes it out regardless of the individual being on their caseload anymore? Like, do you know what I'm getting at?
I do know what you're getting at. And unfortunately, again, I don't think it's typically that simple, because there's always going to be situations where, the doctor who put it in moved to BC, or the doctor who put it in has retired, or, the doctor who put it in only takes care of kids and now you're an adult, right? Like that's just one of the many scenarios where that person may no longer be the right person to take care of your needs, or is just not available to take care of your needs, right? And so I think that's why it's important to just sort of, have a plan as much as is possible. And that's not always perfectly possible. And so, there's always going to be scenarios where that's not well articulated ahead of time. And so, that's what we do though. We kind of figure out how to think outside the box and roll with the punches and do what's best for you or whatever patient is in front of us as doctors in that moment at that time, right? Because that's not necessarily, even if someone had really well articulated a plan 6 years ago, you're not the same person 6 years later, and that plan may no longer ring true. So there's always going to be contingencies that are not going to be perfectly fixable in a systemic way that will have to be addressed sort of on an individual basis.
Yeah. Great point, Dr. Cassidy, and I'm sorry, my brain is running at 100 miles per hour. This should have been my first question at the top of the show, but better late than never. But can you please describe the role of a physiatrist and what they are trained to do?
Yeah, that's a big question too. I think part of the reason why a lot of people don't know what physiatrists are is because we don't have sort of an easy one-liner to explain what we are. But excuse me. As I said, physiatry is a specialty that's dedicated to the care of people who have functional limitations.
Yeah.
And so obviously, though, our role is still as a medical doctor. So lots of people hear physiatrist and they think physiotherapist, which is not the case. I have lots of, physiotherapy colleagues who know so much more stuff about other things that I do not know. And I know lots of things that they don't know, but we have very complementary practices in many ways. And so what I would say is that the physiatrist role is sort of medical management of issues related to the condition causing a functional limitation. So for me, that's medical management of issues related to cerebral palsy or spina bifida or developmental disability or what have you. So that could include things like, managing pain or tone, sleep issues, GI problems, skin breakdown. And that's kind of like the very, traditional medical things. But then I think in general, physiatry would also kind of expand into a little bit more of a holistic and not totally medical approach to all of those issues as well. So that would include talking about things like, what do you want to do when you leave school? And how are we going to help you achieve that? And are we looking at a job? Do you want to be a driver? Do you want to move out? Do you have the right funding? What are your equipment needs that you to be most functional with your limitations? So it's quite a holistic field that tries to approach issues related to your disability, sort of medical and more broadly than that as well.
So this might be a open-ended question. Anyone can jump in, but how do people if they are listening to this interview, how do they know let's take a part two question. Part one is, how do they know when they're ready to transition?
How do they know? I mean, I think one of the trickiest things is that sometimes the transition happens when we're not feeling ready because the systems are designed such that, some things you're going to age out of anyways. My dog is whining in the background. I apologize for that. So I think rather than kind of knowing that you're ready, it's almost knowing that it's coming. And so how do I prepare for it as best as I can? And as with any transition, I don't know that we ever feel fully ready. And it happens anyways. And so having some trust that that you'll figure it out as you go through the journey, right? Like that there's not one way to do it. right way to do it or one single path. But
what,
yeah.
what, 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 um, you, you answered this, you, answer to what is the, if there is one, what is the best way of going about transitioning when you're ready?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. So Danny, I'm not sure what completely what you're asking me, because I think about transition as being kind of a life.
Yeah,
It's a long journey, right? Like
yeah,
there's not just one part. Like so there's a point in time
yeah,
when you leave school, right?
yeah,
Or there's a point in time when you change doctors, or there
yeah,
might be a point in time when you move out on your own or change a different living situation. But all of that,
yeah,
like the transition part is the journey around it, leading up to it and then getting used to it after it in my mind. So
yeah.
is there a particular part that you were asking about?
I guess the, I guess, um, I guess the medical, the medical, tra- uh, transition, like, let's say, and Dr. Cassidy, you might be better at answering this question. Can agree, um, but let's say that, let's say that your pediatric doctor retires and you don't have adult doctor, like, where, um, how do people know if you, your line of medicine is the right fit for them, if you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think that's it's a bit of a tricky question. And again, I think it's going to come down to sort of different answers for different individuals, right? Because I don't think that there's a big
Yeah.
blanket answer to that.
Yeah.
So I think that, physiatry is a field, and then the physiatrists who practice in it are well positioned to manage sort of a spectrum of issues that relate to disability. And so I think that that's, a broadly true statement. Whether or not any particular individual with a condition that results in functional impairment may feel a benefit from physiatry, I think depends entirely on them and what they feel that their needs are, right? Because,
Yeah.
maybe some people feel like their needs are more related to, finding a job, and some people feel their needs are more related to pain management, and they're going to have totally different needs from a care provider. And so I don't think that there's one clear answer to your statement. I would agree totally with what Kim said about the fact that transition isn't one point in time. It's a broad range of time that includes the preparation for transfer and then the period of time after transfer. And all of that sort of encompasses transition. And that, by definition, then has to take place on both the pediatric and the adult side, right? It can't just be sort of one or the other. And so if your pediatric provider retires, when you're nearing the time of transition, hopefully it's something that you've already given some thought to. And, my answer to your question about what the sort of most important thing is to do around preparing for transition, it's actively doing it, right? It's knowing that it's coming. It's not putting it to the back of your mind and hoping it'll never come. It's preparing, right? It's making sure that you're thinking about it actively and taking steps to be ready for it.
Yeah, great point, Dr. Cassidy, and I'm sorry for, to my audience. I'm sorry that this episode is a bit longer than my regular programming, but that is because I don't get these ladies in the same room too often, so I want to get as much information as I can of them when here, but we will wrap up soon, I promise. But Dr. Cassidy, what would what would be your message? No, I'll save that question for at the end. I don't know if this is the time or if this is appropriate episode, but I recently started a new teacher on this show with my guest get the actually they want they want so I think that would be the great time for that question. So Ken, what would be your question for me?
Well, that's I'm excited to ask you a question. I want to know what you would say was most helpful for you, or what advice you would give to somebody around that whole transition to adulthood.
It's a hard question because you're both scaring. You're both sitting right in front of me. I would say to first of all find someone who you trust to take you through that transition, or that you help him and I think having I know that having I know that I didn't have Dr. Cassidy when I first started, but I have her now. But I would say get a physiatrist or something, so you're not always swimming around in a pond or what have you, or you're not always like, where do I go? Because she, or you're, in this case, it's not the category, but your physiatrist will always have the answer for you, so you're not always floundering. So I would highly recommend you find someone that you trust, and B, get a physiatrist or medical professional who can treat not just one area but a whole spectrum of um areas that we you're not really floundering. That would be my answer to that. Okay, Dr. Cassidy, it's your turn. Yeah.
Well, I have to say thank you again, Danny. It's my pleasure to be involved in your care, and I hope that it sounds like it's been helpful, and I hope it always is. So, I'll just say that before I ask you my question, which is, having navigated from pediatric to adults, is there anything that you would do differently? Would you have started thinking of earlier? Are there things that you think back on now and say, oh, that wasn't right, I should have gone this way?
Yeah, and again, this goes back to Kim, get my suggestion to anyone listening to this is, get, get a, get someone like Kim. I don't know what the right terminology is, Kim, but you can tell me now or later. But my suggestion is to get someone like him who can guide you on your journey, so you're not always going at it alone. So that would be my advice. And also get started as soon as you can, because it's not it's not something that you can do slowly or lightly. It takes a lot of work, and it's not always gonna be easy. Trust me, I know, but it's worth it in the end. So that would be my answer to that question. And I guess this will be a segue into my final question, and I'll go around the table again. What can I begin with you, because you're in the first position? What would be your message to someone who is watching this, who is thinking of transitioning, or I guess what would be your main final message?
My message, I guess, goes back to the first question you asked. I think it's about, don't be afraid to follow your dreams, right? So to allow yourself to dream big and let that dreaming be what guides you through the transition. Because, that, as you said, Danny, it's not always easy, and it's going to take some work. And so you want to be headed for something that you're excited for. So don't settle for anything less than what excites you. That's my
Yeah, yeah, not that happening. What would be your final word of knowledge, or your message to my audience?
Well, I think that one was a hard one to follow. That was such a nice, lovely message. I just loved it. I think that, the one thing that I would say is that transition, as Kim said, it's, it's hard, which is why you want to make sure you're working towards something that excites you. But I also think, don't give up. That's going to be my message, is don't give up, because it can be hard. And especially if it's not easy to identify exactly who's going to meet you on the other side and then who's going to support you on that side, I think it can feel lonely and challenging. But I also, implore you, just keep going, because you will find the supports that you need, I hope. And it just they might a lot of effort to find. So just keep going.
Yeah. And I guess my final message to my audience is if you are as lucky as I was finding these two ladies to take me through my journey, you'll be fine. So I know this episode may sound daunting, but you'll find the answers you need sooner or later. So as Kim said, don't, or Dr. Cassidy said, don't give up and follow your dreams, and things will work out fine. So I want to thank you both for joining me on this episode of Possibility. It's been a real pleasure for myself and my audience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. It was really fun. I enjoyed it. I appreciate the invitation.
And thank you as well.
Yeah, and we will be right back with my final remarks. So stay tuned, everyone. Wasn't that a great conversation? And I'm sorry that it was a bit longer than my other conversations, but I wanted to make the most of this opportunity because I don't know when I'll have another chance to have those ladies together, and they really know their stuff. So I apologize for the long episode this time, but I'll do my best for it not to happen again. So until next time, keep the gift of disability, and for all of us here, possibility, keep the gift of disability, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.